She smiled not because everything was okay, but because that's what the world needed from her. She wore that smile like armor, polished and perfect, so no one would ask questions. So no one would worry, so no one would see the truth. To everyone around her, she was light, she was laughter. She was calm in the middle of chaos, and that's exactly what she wanted them to see. Because if they saw her strength, they wouldn't ask about her weakness. From a distance, her life looked full, filled with friends, work, responsibilities, laughter. But if you looked closely, if you paused long enough to really see her, you might have noticed something else. A flicker in her eyes when she thought no one was watching, a delayed response to a joke, a sigh just a second too long. The smile was there, yes, but behind it lived a silence so deep, even she couldn't fully describe it. She had learned early on that people feel safer around happy people, that when you're smiling, they relax. They trust, they lean in, and she wanted that not for herself, but for them, so she became what they needed. She became the comforting voice, the one who always said, "I'm fine," the one who gave encouragement, advice, laughter, energy, all while something inside her was quietly fading. But smiling while breaking is its own kind of ache. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, it's subtle, like a hairline fracture that no one sees until it shatters. And every day, she smiled a little harder, hoping it would be enough to hold the cracks together. Because what would happen if she stopped? What would happen if she let the world see her tired, her overwhelmed, her heart that didn't feel like it could carry one more thing? She couldn't risk it. Too many people depended on her light. Too many people leaned on her when they felt lost. She thought that if she gave in to the sadness even once, everything she'd built, every relationship, every responsibility would crumble. So she held it in. She cried in silence when no one was around, sometimes in the bathroom, sometimes late at night when the world was asleep. She would press her hand over her mouth just to keep from making a sound, just to make sure no one would know. Because being found crying felt more dangerous than the crying itself. What would people think? What would they say? She couldn't take that risk, not when they needed her to be okay. And yet, there was a part of her that wished someone would see through it. That someone would look at her and say, "You don't have to do this today. You don't have to smile," but no one ever did. Not because they didn't care, but because she had become too good at pretending. She was always the strong one, always the light, and when you become everyone's source of comfort, they rarely ask if you're in need of comfort too. The smile was never fake. It was just not the whole story. It was the part she gave the world, the part she used to keep others close. The part that made her feel safe, because as long as she smiled, no one would see how much she was hurting. As long as she smiled, she wouldn't have to explain what she didn't fully understand herself. But behind every smile was a truth she never dared to speak, that she was tired, that she was lonely, that she didn't want to have to be the strong one anymore. And maybe, just maybe, the world didn't need her to smile all the time. Maybe what the world really needed was her truth, her full, honest, unfiltered self. But the habit was too deep, the mask too practiced, so she smiled for the world and cried in the silence. Pain doesn't always speak in loud voices. It doesn't always scream or break down in front of others. Sometimes pain is quiet. Sometimes it sits in the corners of a room, in the pause between words, in the way someone avoids eye contact just long enough for you to miss it. That's the kind of pain. She carried the kind that didn't need to be loud to be heavy. She never made a scene. She never fell apart where others could see. Instead, her hurt lived in the small moments no one noticed, the way she lingered a few extra seconds in bed before starting her day, as if she needed to gather invisible strength just to move, the way her voice trembled for half a second before steadying, Her tone always composed but her soul stretched thin. The way she laughed at everyone's jokes, but rarely made any of her own anymore. These were the quiet signals of someone who was holding too much for too long. She had grown used to hiding it, not because she was trying to lie, but because she had learned that most people don't know what to do with real sadness. She had once tried to express it, softly, gently, hoping someone would meet her there, but what she got in return were quick solutions, forced optimism, or subtle discomfort. People wanted to fix her pain, not feel it with her, and that made her retreat even deeper into silence. That silence became her refuge, but also her prison. Behind her smiles, behind the calm exterior, she was tired. Tired of pretending, tired of carrying emotions that never got to breathe, tired of feeling invisible even when surrounded by people. Her pain had a language, but no one was fluent enough to understand it, so she stopped trying to explain. She stopped reaching out. She learned to cry alone, not out of weakness, but because it was the only place her feelings felt safe. She would sit on the edge of her bed, knees pulled to her chest, and let the tears fall silently. No sobs, no theatrics, just slow, steady release. The kind of crying that came not from one event, but from everything all at once. Years of being the strong one. Years of putting others first. Years of believing that her value came from what she gave, not what she needed. It was in those quiet nights, those sacred, secret moments, that her pain finally spoke. Not with words, but with raw presence, with the ache in her chest that never seemed to ease, with the question that kept returning, will anyone ever see me without me having to fall apart for them to notice? The world often teaches us that if our pain isn't visible, it doesn't count. That if we're not crying in public or asking for help loudly, we must be fine, but that's not how it works. Some of the deepest wounds bleed in silence, and hers did, daily. She kept showing up anyway. She went to work. She answered calls. She smiled at strangers, but inside, she was fading. Her soul was running on fumes. Her silence wasn't peace. It was the only form of survival she had left, because sometimes speaking the pain feels like it would make it more real. Sometimes the words are just too heavy. She didn't want pity. She didn't want attention. She just wanted someone to recognize that pain doesn't always look like falling apart. Sometimes it looks like someone who always shows up, someone who always smiles, someone who never says no. What she needed wasn't fixing. She needed space, space to feel without being rushed, space to be sad without being questioned, space to breathe without pretending, because pain has a quiet language, and if we don't learn how to listen to it, we will continue to miss the ones who need us the most. She was hurting, not loudly, but deeply, and no one heard it because no one knew how to listen. They loved how bright she was, how she could walk into a room and make it feel lighter. Her presence was comforting, her laughter infectious, and her energy always warm, always giving. People felt better around her, safer, more at ease, and they never thought to question how she managed to give so much of herself so consistently. But slowly her voice began to grow quieter. She still smiled, but there was a heaviness behind it now. Her laughter didn't come as easily, and when it did, it felt slightly delayed, as if she were waiting to remember how. She became a little more withdrawn. She answered texts, but not with the same warmth. She showed up, but not with the same spark. Her light hadn't gone out completely, but it was dimming, and no one noticed. That's the thing about people who are always there for others. When they start to fade, the world often doesn't see it. Because they're not used to needing help, they're not known for falling apart, so when they begin to withdraw, it's subtle. It's not loud enough to disrupt the rhythm of anyone else's life. They still show up to work. They still smile at friends. They still play their part, but underneath it all, they're slowly drifting, hoping someone will look a little closer, hoping someone will pause long enough to say, "You don't seem like yourself," but the world moves fast. People take comfort in predictability, and she had always been predictable, the reliable one, the strong one. So when her voice grew softer, no one leaned in to hear her better. When her smile didn't reach her eyes, no one asked why. They assumed she was fine, because that's the version of her they had always known, but she wasn't fine. She was tired in a way that rest couldn't fix. She was holding emotions that had never been spoken, carrying burdens no one had seen. And the silence around her only made it worse, because the quieter she became, the more invisible she felt. And the more invisible she felt, the more she wondered if she mattered at all beyond what she could offer others. There's a deep kind of loneliness that comes from being surrounded by people who don't really see you, not out of cruelty, but out of comfort. They've grown used to you being okay, to you being the strong one. And strength, when it becomes your identity, makes people forget to ask you how you're really doing. She started keeping conversations short, not because she didn't care, but because she didn't have the energy to pretend anymore. She would listen, nod, offer support, but the moment the call ended, the silence would return louder than ever. She wanted someone to notice, to reach out not because they needed something, but because they truly cared. But they didn't, and that absence, that lack of recognition, became its own kind of pain, not the sharp, obvious kind, but the dull, constant ache of being unseen, of feeling like your sadness could fill the room, but still be invisible to the people in it. She didn't expect anyone to fix her. She just wanted someone to ask, someone to stop long enough to look her in the eyes and say, "You seem a little different. Are you okay?" Not a small talk. Not out of obligation, but from a place of real awareness. She didn't need big gestures. She needed to feel like she wasn't the only one paying attention to her struggle. But when no one asked, she stopped waiting. She told herself she could handle it, like always, that she didn't need anyone to notice. That maybe it was better this way, quieter, simpler, but the truth was, her silence wasn't a choice. It was the only thing left when the world stopped listening. They noticed her light when it burned bright, but they never saw the moments it flickered, never noticed when her laughter turned hollow, never heard the meaning behind the silence that kept growing. And that's the hardest part, being in pain, and no one even noticing you've changed. She was the kind of person who always gave a little more than she had. Her kindness wasn't casual, it was intentional, deep, and constant. She gave love like it was a duty, like the world depended on her goodness to keep it steady. She believed that if she could just keep being good to others, maybe, just maybe, she wouldn't feel so hollow inside. But what no one realized was that her kindness had become a disguise. A quiet mask she wore not only to protect others from her pain, but to protect herself from being truly seen. Because being seen meant being vulnerable. And being vulnerable had never felt safe. She poured herself into people, not because she didn't value herself, but because somewhere along the way, she had started to believe that being needed was the same as being loved. So she became useful. She became dependable. She became the one everyone turned to when their lives unraveled. And part of her was proud of that, proud to be the person who others leaned on. But the other part, the silent part, ached to be held in return. She kept telling herself that love was supposed to be selfless, that giving was its own reward, but there's a difference between giving freely and giving to survive. And she was giving from emptiness, from a place of quiet desperation that no one could see because it was wrapped so beautifully in acts of service. People praised her generosity. They called her selfless, strong, compassionate, and she appreciated the recognition, but it often felt hollow. Because the more they praised her for giving, the more pressure she felt to keep doing it, even when it hurt. Even when she needed someone to give to her, she would offer her last bit of energy to someone in pain, then go home and cry in the dark. She would stay up late checking in on others, while wondering why no one ever checked in on her. She would smile and say, "I'm just happy to help," while secretly longing for someone to say, "You don't always have to be the one helping." But she didn't know how to ask for that. Kindness had become her language, her shield, her way of staying connected. She feared that if she stopped giving, people might stop staying. That if she didn't serve a purpose, she wouldn't be needed. And if she wasn't needed, then what was she? So she kept showing up, kept giving, kept putting everyone before herself, hoping that someday someone would notice that her hands were trembling while she held the world together. And this is the heartbreak that lives inside the hearts of so many like her, those who love quietly, deeply, constantly, while longing to be loved in return. Not for what they give, not for what they do, but simply for who they are. She wasn't angry, she wasn't bitter. She just felt invisible, as if people only saw her when they needed something, as if her kindness had become a transaction instead of a connection. And she began to wonder, if she stopped giving, would anyone still see her? The hardest part was that she didn't know how to stop. Her kindness wasn't fake, it was real. It was just that no one realized it was also a cry for connection. A way to say, "I'm here but I'm hurting too." She hoped that if she kept showing up for others, eventually someone would show up for her, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. But too often, the world forgets that those who give the most are often those who need the most. She smiled, she supported, she sacrificed, all in the hope that someone might see past the giving and finally notice the girl who was breaking behind the kindness. When the world saw her, they saw a woman full of light, strong, composed, always moving forward. They saw the version of her that smiled in public, that carried conversations, that held others steady, even when the ground beneath her was shaking. But what they didn't see, what they never saw, were the nights when she collapsed in silence, when the mask finally slipped, when she cried not to be heard, but to simply let the pain out of her body. She cried when no one was watching, not because she wanted to be dramatic, not because she wanted attention, but because crying in front of others never felt like an option. She had tried once, a long time ago, and the moment her tears came, the responses were quick. "Don't cry. You'll be fine. You're stronger than this." Words meant to help, maybe, but they only taught her one thing, that her sadness made others uncomfortable, that her pain had to be hidden, so she learned to hide it. She became skilled at it. She could be in the middle of a storm and still hold someone else's umbrella. She could walk into a room with red eyes and say it was allergies or just lack of sleep. And people believed her not because her stories were convincing, but because they didn't want to believe she could be anything but okay. They had grown too used to her strength, but strength like hers isn't endless. It has a cost. What they never saw was the way she sat on the floor of her room at night, clutching her knees to her chest, feeling like the world had no space for her pain. What they never noticed were the tiny cracks, the fatigue behind her eyes, the hesitation in her voice, the way she smiled just a second too late. They never saw the moments when her heart felt too heavy to carry, when she had to bite her lip just to keep from breaking down in front of someone. Because breaking in front of someone was too risky. It meant exposure, it meant needing help, and she didn't know how to need. So she waited until the world went quiet, until the house was still, until there were no calls to return, no messages to answer, no more pretending. Then she let go, softly, completely, and in those moments, the tears came, not in floods, but in steady drops that carried years of pain, exhaustion, and unmet needs. Her pillow knew more about her sadness than any person ever had. That's the cruel irony. She was always there when others cried. Always the one who offered a shoulder, a kind word, a quiet space. She understood sadness deeply, not just as an emotion, but as a weight people carry. And still, no one thought to ask her how she was really doing. No one ever said, "You've been quiet lately. Are you okay?" Because they couldn't imagine her breaking. They didn't want to, and so she continued the cycle. She smiled for the world. She cried in the silence. She kept holding others, hoping someone might one day notice that she needed to be held too. But each night that passed with her crying alone only added to the loneliness. Not just the physical kind, but the emotional loneliness of being surrounded by people who never really see you, who love the version of you that's always okay, but who don't know how to hold the version of you that's tired, messy, undone. She didn't want pity. She didn't want saving. She just wanted someone to sit beside her in the quiet and say, "You don't have to be strong right now. I'm here." But no one ever did. So she learned to be her own comfort, to hold herself when no one else would, to cry without shame in the silence, knowing that even if no one saw her pain, it was still real. It still mattered, and maybe, just maybe one day, someone would see her not just when she was smiling, but when she was breaking too. This is for her, the woman who smiled so the world wouldn't worry, who gave so others wouldn't feel empty, who listened while her own voice trembled in silence. This is for the one who carried her pain so quietly, she began to believe it didn't deserve to be spoken. The one who thought being strong meant being silent. The one who kept showing up day after day, even when her heart was running on empty. She didn't ask for much. In fact, she rarely asked for anything at all. She didn't want to be a burden. She didn't want to make anyone uncomfortable, so she stayed quiet. She made herself small. She told herself, "Just get through today," over and over again. And she did. Somehow she always did. But the cost was high, not in the ways others could see, but in the quiet places of her soul where no one ever thought to look. She had become so good at pretending to be okay that even she started to forget how to ask for help. Vulnerability had become foreign. The idea of being held without having to earn it. It felt impossible. She believed that if she kept giving, kept loving, kept smiling eventually, someone would see her. Not the version of her the world praised, not the strong one, not the one with all the answers, but the real her, the tired, hurting, hopeful version hidden underneath it all. But it never quite happened, and so she kept hiding. She kept smiling. She kept crying where no one could hear her. Until one day something shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet realization that she was allowed to want more. That she was allowed to be seen. That strength wasn't just about enduring pain, it was about honoring it. And healing didn't come from pretending everything was fine. It came from finally telling the truth. The truth that she was tired of carrying the world on her back. The truth that she needed rest, not just sleep. The truth that she longed to be held in the same way she had held others, with care, with patience, with presence. And slowly, she began to unlearn the lie that she had to be everything for everyone to be enough. She began to unlearn the silence, the shame, the pressure. She began to believe that she, too, deserved the same gentleness she gave so freely to others. That she was not weak for needing help, that she was not broken for needing space, that she didn't have to earn rest by first falling apart. She began to understand that her tears didn't make her any less powerful. In fact, they were a part of her strength, a reflection of everything she had carried alone. And finally, she stopped apologizing for the weight she held. She stopped shrinking. She stopped hiding behind smiles that didn't tell the full story. She looked in the mirror, really looked, and whispered to herself, "You don't have to be the strong one today." and maybe for the first time, she believed it. She took a deep breath and let herself be held by her own arms, by her own truth, by the quiet permission that she was enough even without the performance of strength. She allowed herself to cry, not because she was falling apart, but because she was finally letting go. Letting go of the idea that she had to be perfect to be loved, letting go of the belief that she had to suffer in silence to be worthy, letting go of the pain that told her she was only valuable when she was useful. And in that letting go, she found something she had been missing for far too long: peace. Not the kind that comes from pretending, but the kind that comes from finally being seen. And this time, not just by others, but by herself.